Welcome to Reclamation's History Webinar Series, A Dam for All Seasons, Hollywood, the Bureau of Reclamation, and Construction of Parker Dam. This is the 10th of a monthly series as we build towards Reclamation's 120th anniversary on June 17th, 2022. This event is being recorded. If you're not interested, please disconnect at this time. If you're having technical issues, please disconnect and join again. Additionally, you may have a better success connecting to the team app on your computer and not in the web browser. If you have a question, please click on the comment bubble or the question bubble in the upper right-hand corner. We will do our best to answer as many questions at the end of the presentation. At this time, I would like to introduce Reclamation Senior Historian, Dr. Andrew A. Gahan. Andrew?
Thank you, Peter, and greetings, everybody. Throughout this series, we have seen multiple ways reclamation activities have influenced the transformation of the American West, from a mostly rural to an urbanized society. As the West grew and transitioned, so too did reclamation's mission. Today, we are going to look at the growth and expansion of an industry intimately connected to the West and its relationship with changes simultaneously occurring within the reclamation program. It is my pleasure to introduce Tony Lindenberger. Tony is currently the manager of the Department of the Interior's Controlled Unclassified Information Program. With a BA and MS in history from Colorado College and Utah State University, respectively, Tony jumped right into federal service as a part of Reclamation's history program. After helping to plan the big birthday party for Reclamation Centennial in 2002, Tony moved to the newly formed Security Office in the Security, Safety, and Law Enforcement Office in Denver. As a security specialist, she was exposed to all aspects of the security program before finding a niche in the information, security, and interagency coordination. As Peter mentioned, Tony's topic is A Dam for All Seasons, Hollywood, the Bureau of Reclamation, and Construction of Parker Dam. So without further ado, Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter and Andrew. I'm excited to be here today, revisiting one of my favorite research projects and presentations ever. Thanks to a summer job in the history program many years ago, I had the opportunity to research the construction of Parker Dam. As an undergrad, I minored in film studies and cultivated a love of film and Hollywood. When I started researching Parker, the correlations between reclamation and Hollywood were fascinating and provided the foundation for my master's thesis. This relationship is what I want to talk about today. Here we go. So, as Andrew mentioned, water is critical to development of the West, and anybody who lives in the West knows that. One of the early settlers knew that you had to have water to ensure that you had a reliable infrastructure for whatever settlement you were putting in place. And without water, you could not promote development of agriculture, industry, and population growth. They are inextricably linked. So your options are, you can either import the water, or you can start with an industry that you can start with a development that already has water, or you can import it. So those are pretty much your two options when it comes to growth of development in arid lands. So early Los Angeles took the option of settling with existing settlements. They went from, there had been long an early water supply in LA to that they founded initial settlements. The sorry, I'm having mouse issues. So the existing settlements date back to early settlements. The pueblos of Los Angeles figured out very early that there was an existing water supply in LA, and that was a requirement for development of that city. But as the city continued to grow, they figured out really early that what was there was mostly underground and was not going to sustain long-term growth of those settlements. So one of the first places that they started looking for water was on the other side of the hill, in Owens Valley, which had a dependable water supply. The issue was getting it from point A to point B. And point A was the Owens Valley. It would take a significant aqueduct to move it to the other side of the mountains and into LA, where it could actually be used for development purposes. So Reclamation was founded in 1902, as we all know, and they had begun their efforts actually earlier than that, with USGS doing investigations of any place that there were existing water supplies that could potentially support a settlement or a development. Most of the initial small settlements had been accomplished prior to that, so it was going to take bigger efforts to actually get something working to be able to have larger growth settlements. The small projects were done. Now we needed bigger projects in the federal presence to be able to do that. As part of their investigations, J.L. Lippincott, sorry, was the chief engineer for the California Division of Reclamation, previously USGS. And so he had gone out to Owens Valley to be able and to start doing some of those investigations to figure out what options were available for water and development in that valley. Now, because Lippincott was Reclamation's representative, the local farmers and Reclamation's mission, the local farmers was irrigation. The local farmers were ready and excited for him to come in, thinking that Reclamation was going to come into the valley and build a project to help support their growth in infrastructure in the valley. At that particular point in time, Reclamation had no requirements or limitations on outside work. So Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and William Mulholland actually hired Lippincott, and he shared all of the investigations that he had done directly with LA and said, you know, this is what we found. These are what the options are. And so Mulholland and Fred Eaton went in and started buying up land. And because the settlers knew that Lippincott was working with him, they sold it because they were expecting that that project was ultimately going to support them and irrigation. It was only later that they discovered that that was actually not the case, that they were buying land on behalf of Eaton and Mulholland and Los Angeles versus Reclamation. And as they were doing it, that was a misconception that the LA representatives never actually corrected. So they let the settlers believe that. And that's left a really bad taste in the mouths of Californians on both sides ever since. So it's become rather legendary in terms of that effort. And then, so those investigations and buying up land actually eventually resulted in the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which brought the water over from Owens Valley into Los Angeles to help continue the development of LA and the efforts that were going on there. So another thing that LA and DWP were doing at that time was the development of St. Francis Dam. So St. Francis was Mulholland's brainchild. He designed it, he ensured that it was constructed exactly the way that he wanted it constructed, etc. So in 1928, unfortunately, that structure actually failed. And that was something that Mulholland never actually recovered from due to the fact that it was his brainchild. So he felt responsible for the people that died and the resulting damage that happened because of that. But that also removed a critical water supply from LA that they were expecting to have from behind that facility. So back to early reclamation. Oh, too many slides. Back to early reclamation. So Reclamation, founded in 1902, started looking at all of the options for development. They started their first project, the Truckee-Carson project, in 1903, and began that working their way out into development and settling the West. So what's going on in LA is also going on in Reclamation. There's this parallel. And the next major issue becomes the division of the Colorado River. So in 1922, the 7 states of the Colorado River Basin, the upper and lower basin, get together to figure out how they're going to divide up the Colorado River. And they make their decision based on an allocation of 13.5 million acre feet. So essentially they break it up into each basin gets 7.5 million acre feet every year. Unfortunately, as we now know, those numbers weren't accurate, but still. So the division was upper basin gets half, lower basin gets half essentially, and then we go from there. Well, then they had to further allocate it between the 3 states in the lower basin, namely Nevada, California, and Arizona. And Arizona did not like that of the allocation that California was taking roughly 4.4 million acre feet of that allocation. So it left Nevada and Arizona with very little of that allocation. So Arizona opted not to ratify the compact, said this is not going to work. We need to further discuss this, further allocate it, because the other issue at point was whether or not the Gila River runoff was included in that amount, or if that was a separate watershed for Arizona to develop on their own. So Arizona said not doing it, not going to ratify it. At that particular point, you needed all 7 states to ratify it. So it sat and sat. And it actually takes Arizona about 20 more years to finally decide to ratify that. But in the meantime, 1929, the Great Depression hits. So, you know, stock market crashed. All of a sudden, people were not working. There were issues. One of the first things that happens right after FDR takes office is that he starts investing in these large work projects. So one of the most famous ones actually started before he took office and was well underway, which is Hoover. And as part of the authorization for Hoover, they actually included the ratification of the Colorado River Compact so that that compact could provide the foundation for the remaining for Hoover and how the water would be stored and then allocated between those variety of states. And so originally California, in the meantime, Mulholland in the background is out quietly gathering support. He gets 10 of the local municipalities together to create the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and asks them to, so they incorporate themselves as the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and then they contract with Reclamation for the first deliveries of water out of Lake Mead. But their allocation is actually, it's about 1.1 million acre feet. And they are the 4th and 5th priority after the 3 irrigation districts that are guaranteed water out of the All-American Canal and out of Hoover, because again, irrigation is still primary mission for reclamation. So it soon becomes clear that there isn't really quite enough water to support all 3 irrigation districts as well as the MWD allocation. So Mulholland and company start doing some research to figure out what the next answer is. So the next answer ends up actually being just downstream, which is Parker Dam. So Parker is authorized in 1933. They took advantage of the fact that it was just downstream of Hoover. Hoover was pretty much finalized at that point. Reclamation awarded the contract to 6 companies, and then 6 companies could just move downstream to be able to support the construction of this new Parker Dam. Because MWD had agreed to move their allocation to Parker, they also needed to ensure that Parker was actually constructed. So to do that, they provided the funding to do it. So Parker becomes the only facility that Reclamation actually ever constructed, but we didn't pay for. So MWD paid for it, but we still own it. We designed it, we constructed it, everything else. So work begins. They start in 1931. They start putting some of the coffer dam together, everything else. And Arizona says, no, we don't like this. We don't agree with this. You still haven't addressed this issue of whether or not of how we're going to allocate water between California and Arizona and Nevada, though it was addressed in the fact that the Colorado River Compact passage was included when they passed the Boulder Canyon Act. But Arizona said, no, we are not going to let you construct this facility on the river between California and Arizona, whose real sole purpose is to provide water to California. So Arizona really felt that this was another water grab. And so the governor at that time, Benjamin Moore, decided that he was having none of it. And he called out the Arizona National Guard to the dam site. The initial expeditionary force was a major, 3 privates and a cook. It was very small. The major eventually decided very quickly that it was going to be a water-based fight. So he requisitioned ferries from the local ferry master, who happened to be this woman named Nellie Bush, who was also a member of the Arizona legislature. And so he requisitioned her ferries and then put her in charge. So the current thinking at the time, there were California Traveler magazine said, oh, we've got our first female admiral because he put her in charge of this little Arizona Navy. The headlines were scandalous. They were, you know, Arizona declares war, the only inland state to have a Navy. It definitely made widespread news because this was so unusual. So eventually this goes to the Supreme Court, says, you know, it wasn't authorized, it's a navigable river, so you have to go through the process of going through the navigable river. So it takes them about another 2 years to get through the actual process to get the project authorized officially through Congress, through the Secretary of War, Chief of Engineers, to say that yes, we're going to actually construct it. So ultimately, Arizona lost this particular fight, but they're still known for this little event of having the Arizona Navy. So it goes back and forth. So construction begins, then it goes to the Supreme Court, so construction stops. Then we go back and we start again and we go back and forth. So it took them a couple fits and starts before they actually got really rolling in terms of their construction. And another thing that happened sort of in the middle of all of this is that there is a push to unionize the workers that are actually working on this project. So work stops again, and there are two, the AFL and the CIO, which at that point were still independent unions, both set up picket lines out in front of the construction office. So on one side you had AFL and on the other side you had CIO arguing or picketing on who was actually going to win the contract to unionize the workers. Well, the rumors, in reality, the workers didn't care. So the rumors would determine which company had more picketers on a given day. So if the rumors were they were going to give the contract to AFL, then all the workers would go over and picket for them. If the rumor was that it was going to be CIO, then they would change. So it was sort of amusing to those that were watching it that there wasn't really any loyalty to either organization. So, you know, all of a sudden you would have so many AFL men and then you would have so many CIO men. And the comment once AFL actually won the contract to unionize the workers was, you know, it's amazing that all of a sudden we have no CIO men around and they all of a sudden we have all of the AFL men. So one of the things that's also very unique about Parker is that it is the deepest dam in the world. It's the deepest dam that Reclamation ever constructed. Approximately 73% of the structure is below the river. That's how far down they had to go to hit bedrock to actually make it a stable structure. So even if MWD had wanted to construct this on their own, Mulholland was still too leery after the St. Francis Dam failure to want to take this on. So they were very happy to just have Reclamation design and construct this and be completely responsible for this facility. So as it, you know, takes shape, it takes them about 3 years to finish construction, maybe not quite that. And then it's complete and dedicated in 1936. So 3 years total from the time that it starts to the time that it ends. In the meantime, MWD actually felt like they were fairly comfortable building canals and aqueducts. So they were working in parallel on the Colorado River Aqueduct, which would take its straw out of Lake Havasu and over to LA to continue to support the water needs of LA. The aqueduct started a little bit after the construction of Parker, but it continued pretty much in parallel, and then it took it about another year after to finally be completed to have that water source, which timed actually pretty well because obviously, as we know, the minute that you complete a dam, it doesn't fill. So by the time that Parker filled, they were ready to deliver water to Southern California. So now at the same time, here's where we get to some of the really interesting parallels. You have the development of Hollywood in Southern California. And that starts, actually, the movie industry started in New Jersey and back east with the first actual film to tell a story was released in 1903, which was The Great Train Robbery that was released by the Edison Film Company. And this was the first story. This was the first film to actually tell a story versus being just little vignettes or little clips of things, racehorses running or trains moving. This one actually was a cohesive story. It went from point A to point B. There was a clear beginning, middle, end, a resolution to this. So by releasing this, Edison also proved that he had developed the technology that was going to make this work. He was going to make the film industry work. So that started this interest in other industries also, other groups also using this technology to develop films, because it was pretty clear fairly early on that this was going to be something big and something important. So one of the things that the competing companies did is they started moving west, knowing that at that time it would be a whole lot harder to enforce Edison's patent the further west you got. So they started moving west to get out of the sphere of influence of the patent attorneys to try to prevent them from using this new technology. And so they started in Chicago. They released more films in 1907 in Chicago, which was also, the weather was not conducive. So by about 1911, they had really started moving to Southern California and establishing this enclave known as Hollywood. And one of the things that the early pioneers of film were really, really good at was creating the fantasy. So they knew whatever they were putting on film that was being released would show an ideal world. So they wanted things to be pretty and green and everything else. And then, so then the next major accomplishment comes in 1929, which is the release of The Jazz Singer. And that takes us from just a film that tells a story with usually an in-house piano player in the theater playing the piano to actually coordinating motion and sound on the same film. So what we know today as talkies or an actual film is they were all integrated so you could have words and music that told the story in addition to just the previous screens that would, you know, here's the words that you were reading to talk about the film. So from there, we're creating the fantasy and we're making things pretty. It also happens to be the same time that we hit the Great Depression, 1929. So you still have this industry that's going out that wants to create this illusion that things are pretty and they're green and everything's okay, because even though things are terrible in the Depression, there's still this illusion that's being presented to the American public as they go to the movies, which is one thing that they kept doing during the Depression is it was escapism. And so this fantasy that they're creating, and Hollywood was really, really good at marketing. So this fantasy that they're creating is that California is warm and it's pretty and it's lush and it's green. So that in turn encourages more people to move there. You also get the people that want to come because they are going to become a star, and it gets them out of wherever they are. But it's this illusion of, if you're in the middle of Kansas and the Dust Bowl and awful, that, oh, I can go somewhere warm and green and pretty. And so people continue to move, which again gives you more impetus to need more water to feed that illusion, because you need people. You need water to support the people. So Great Depression, you know, we get the first talkies. We realize that people are still going to go to the movies very quickly because it's cheap. It's this much needed entertainment. It gives people an outlet to just forget what they're doing at any given time. So, you know, you have this beautiful optimism that's very similar to what's going on in Reclamation, because you've got FDR that is putting funding into large-scale water projects. So while the Great Depression was terrible for the majority of the United States, it was actually really good for Reclamation and really good for Hollywood. It helped both of them establish their influence throughout the United States, or in Reclamation's case, the Western United States, and to keep bringing those stories, again, propaganda machine was big on both of them. So you had films like 42nd Street that was very much full of optimism. It coincided with FDR winning the election and taking office. So you have this whole, positive environment in the midst of everything that's really, really not positive. But that outlet was crucial to America at that particular point in time. You also have influence. So film starts very early with influence. Again, it's that propaganda machine of encouraging people to move west because it's pretty, it's green, everything is clean. It's this great place to be. It also is showing, the early news shorts are showing how great the construction projects, you've got Hoover, you've got Shasta, you've got Grand Coulee that are being built. You have those initial shorts that are saying, isn't this great? We're getting America back to work. These wonderful things are happening. But at the same time, it's also a lot where people learned social skills. And movies really started to influence how people acted, how people addressed life, how they approached life. One perfect example of that is It Happened One Night. In 1939, it was 1929, sorry. No, 39. I have my dates wrong, sorry. But so It Happened One Night was released. It was this interesting story of these two people that were hitchhiking across the United States, and they get to one scene that they have to spend the night in a hotel room, and Clark Gable takes off his shirt. And what is revealed is that he's not wearing an undershirt. And previous to this time, that was very proper. Men wore undershirts under all of their clothes. And so the minute that he does this on screen in this film, undershirt sales plummeted because men said, well, this is what's going on in California. This is what's going on in the screen. This is what I am going to do as well. So that influence gets inextricably tied to what's going on in the wider US. So we get to the end of the Depression, the start of World War II, America's coming out of the Depression. Reclamation's established its place in construction and water development. Hollywood has established their place as the center of the film industry. And we get to the beginning of World War II, and both industries are completely primed to be able to capitalize on that, both in good ways and bad ways. Reclamation has provided the infrastructure for war development and infrastructure, the war effort, building ships, building ammunition, everything else. And then Hollywood is actually in a position to promote that as a positive, anti-war, anti-Nazi propaganda on film. So they're both in the position to go forward in the 40s and really grow into those positions that they've established in the previous 40 years for both industries. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Tony. If you have any questions, please submit them using the question icon at the top right part of your screen. I have a question to kick us off today. You showed the movie poster for Chinatown during your presentation. Though fictional, it did show some of the threats and maybe criminal undertakings by the LA Department of Water and Power and those associated with it to get water from Owens Valley. But how accurate of that portrayal was that part of the movie, what they carried out?
So There is a lot of murkiness about what really happened in Owens Valley. There's a lot of bad feelings on both sides, but that particular portion of Chinatown is actually pretty close. As best as we know, it's pretty close to accurate to what was actually going on. Maybe not to the level of violence, but definitely, I mean, what was going on was clearly unethical. It skirted the bounds of illegal, though nobody ever went down that road. And it got to that point of intimidation. I mean, we see it in development in a variety of areas, that you get, one or two farmers that say, yes, I'll sell because they think it's a good thing. And then everybody pressures the last one. So definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it. But at the end of the day, I really think it's pretty close to what we know what happened with that land grab and that water grab from Owens Valley.
I have one more question for you. The building of Parker Dam and the canal and allowing more water and also power to go to Southern California, which helped develop at the time the Hollywood land area, as indicated on the Hollywood sign before land was removed. What's your most kind of interesting story from the development of that, from the development of Hollywood and the development of the Bureau of Reclamation at the same time?
There are so many interesting stories. It's hard to pick one. I find that the parallels are really fascinating, and I hope that I articulated them well as we went through. But just the influence that both had, once you get this idea of motion pictures going on, because they would use the positive propaganda to go forward and encourage people to go to Southern California, as well as come to Reclamation and come build these large structures. I love the story that I mentioned about the undershirt sales. I mean, it's something that we don't even think about today, but it's kind of, to me, it almost parallels what's going on in some circles with TikTok. So this is going on, and so everybody is trying to follow the example that's being set. Well, that was the example, which was what was being seen on the big screen. And so just kind of all of those little stories that come in. Hollywood itself is kind of fascinating in the sense that we think of Hollywood as the movie industry, but in reality, it actually started as Hollywood Land, which was the housing development, and so you kind of end up corrupting this idea because you have this really large sign that, again, everybody's seeing in the positive propaganda, and it becomes associated not with just that housing development up on the hill, but the actual industry that's going on and being developed in that area.
Thank you. We have a question. Do you mind if we, if anyone's interested in having a copy of your presentation, are you okay with us sharing that?
I'm happy to share the slides, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Just to let everyone know, the presentation will be available after the fact, and it'll be the same link you used to join. You can listen there. We will also be putting the video up on Reclamation's intranet also. So it'll be available there later today. I have a question about St. Francis Dam. You mentioned that in your presentation that it failed. What's happened to that area since then? And the failure, and then what's happened? Did they just leave it be? Did they develop that area?
So it's never been developed. We are obviously almost 100 years past it. So I think that the majority of the infrastructure that was left, for a long time, you could still see big chunks of concrete somewhat similar to the remnants of Teton. You could see the aftermath of the flood. I think that a lot of that has been reclaimed just by the water that runs through. But no, that was the end of Mulholland's career and almost his life. That was his life's work, and that failure just decimated him and decimated really any interest in redeveloping that area. Just that flood was so catastrophic and it killed so many people that they felt that it wasn't a safe place to do it, so they've never gone back and done any development.
Can you touch briefly on what was the cause of the dam failure?
So the investigations basically say it wasn't designed correctly and they tried to fill it too fast.
Okay.
And I'm sure.
I think there's.
Go ahead.
I think there's a video online that kind of talks about it a little more. I'll see if I can find something that's public here shortly, and share it. I'm not sure, you're probably the best one to answer it, but is Arizona working better with the partners in the basin now versus back then? I think the answer is yes, but.
I think the answer is yes. Again, I'm not the best person to respond to that. I would push that to somebody who's working in the lower Colorado basin on some of those issues. I think yes, but the attributed to Mark Twain famous quote, "Whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over," is alive and well in the West. And I think there's always going to be issues about how we allocate the Colorado River, just from the standpoint of we had faulty numbers to begin with. So how do we continue to support growth based on a river that doesn't have enough water in it? So I think that now, as opposed to doing things like calling out the Arizona Navy, we are actually collaboratively working towards those situations, those answers. So I hope that the answer to that is yes, going forward.
Yeah, and based on what I know, I think it is, but you can take a look at the media and stuff. I think they're all working together during the drought shortages and some of the agreements over the last few years. So I would say yes, they are. I'm sharing a link to a case study on the failure of St. Francis Dam by ASDSO. It's the Association of State Dam Safety Officials. So it looks at the failure of that dam. It was in 1928 and resulted in the death of more than 400 civilians. So just wanted to pass it on and share that with everyone.
Thank you, Peter. That would have been kind of where I directed people, as I know there's been a couple studies, later studies that talked about it, that will have more of the engineering detail than I do.
So I just have a comment. I'm a graduate of film school too, and this has been a great trip down memory lane. The water wars of California was a major topic of lecture and discussion in our classes. It's amazing how much the politics of water during that time influenced both the movie and water industry today. Great presentation. And then they also suggested about filling Lake Powell with whiskey instead of water. That might be a little easier to do. So.
Right.
I think I don't have any more questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead and submit those. And we'll see. Just give it a minute to see if there's any other questions coming in. Do you know what happened to the Arizona Navy? Did they kind of stick around for a little bit, or?
Once they started going down the road of litigating it, going through the Supreme Court and Congress, they rather dispersed. It was more a visual show than actual anything that lasted for very long. I think that they spent, if I remember correctly, like 4 or 5 months out there. And then I think it did get a little chilly for Arizona, and so pretty much everybody, and nothing was going on at that point. So the only thing it was kind of back to the idea of Hollywood, as it was theater. It was sound bites and talking points and pictures that could continue to be popularized to show what was going on. But in effect, it really didn't have any impact on the construction of the facility, other than it was an annoyance for those people that were actually starting to do some of those investigations of initial work on, you know, how are we going to build this facility. So yeah, it's more an antidote, I think, than anything that was super effective.
Okay. Well, we don't have any other questions at this time. If people have any other questions, are you okay if they reach out to you via email that's up there on the screen right now?
Absolutely. You can also chat me through Teams. I'm obviously still in DOI's network, so I'm happy to chat with anybody at any point. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. Our next presentation will be at the end of April. It is titled From the Wayne Aspinall Unit to the Animas La Plata Project, the development of the Upper Colorado River. Thank you to all our presenters today, Tony Lindenberger and Dr. Andrew Gahan. Thank you to Chelsea Kennedy for producing the event and doing all the behind the scenes work. So thank you. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day on this last day of March.